We might get you going. I'll ask our club services director, Deb Farquhar, to more formally introduce you.
Good morning, Dick.
Good morning.
I'm the face that was on the phone.
I remember speaking to you.
Yes. Welcome to our club. The members have already been told that you were introduced to me by Ted Hayden from the Rotary Club of Keilor. And Rotary being a small world, the message goes around. Now, I know that you have a vast history with the Bureau of Meteorology, and that you are known as the weather bug, and that you have written a book. I'm not quite sure what you're actually going to speak about today, so you can enlighten all of us, and welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I'll get onto screen share now, just to make sure we can see it all, and then I'll start talking. So we can do a share. Okay, and I'll just open up my presentation and make sure we can see it all. So this is hopefully going to bring it up. All right, can we see that okay? All right, just to answer your question briefly, the reason I have an interest in Coffs Harbour history, I might say I'm by no means an expert. There'll be people that in the room this morning that know more than I do. And when we get to Q&A at the finish there, hopefully we'll have some time. You can help fill in some of the many gaps that I in my knowledge. But the reason I'm interested in Coffs Harbour history, my daughter lives in Sawtell, which of course is pretty close by, and we've had lots of trips into Coffs Harbour, and I found it a very fascinating place. So that's a little bit of the background history. I know time's pretty limited, so look, I'll just go through fairly quickly, and if we have any questions or particularly comments at the end, I'd certainly welcome those. Coffs Harbour, originally known as Coffs Harbour, after Captain John Corf, and apparently he sheltered from a storm there in 1847. The name was misspelt on Sydney survey records, and the town became known as Coffs Harbour. Some similarities there with Surrey Hills in Sydney. The original spelling of Surrey Hills was S-U-R-R-E-Y, but the E got dropped out, so it's just known as Surrey Hills without the E today. There's an early view from Coffs collections of Coffs Harbour Township around about 1902. And one of the first things that jumps out is we can't see any telephone or electricity lines. So I assume back in 1902, they were going by kerosene lamps, and there was probably no telephone hookup at that stage, but that changed fairly quickly. But the road's unsealed, as you can see there. It looks, some of the buildings on the left there, it looks a bit like some of the Wild West sets you see in the movies there. So it was a very interesting place back in 1902. There's the post office in 1910, and there's a line going over there, so I assume that that was a telephone line, so you possibly could go to the post office to make telephone calls. I think that was common amongst many rural areas at the time, but some of you may know more about that. There's a view looking down Mooney Street. This is around about 1910, and you can see the Fitzroy Hotel there, and over here is an interesting one. That's it's actually the Coffs Harbour Advocate, and you can just make out it says Coffs Harbour and Dorrigo District Paper, and that began in 1907. And in fact, there's the first page, the front page on the 12th of February 1907, which was the first edition of the newspaper. So very, very interesting newspaper. Certainly one of the top rural newspapers at the time, and it went from 1907. There's a view down looking east along High Street, and this is around about 1912. The post office we were talking about, you can just see it on the right there. The sign says post office, and on the left there is Best's Guest House. That's one of the places there that you could stay at, and you're looking down the street there. We're also seeing these telephone poles. We think these were telephone poles rather than electricity. Electricity, from what I can understand, once again, you can correct me on this, arrived in around about 1915. So these were all telephone connections we see here. There's the famous Coffs Harbour jetty around 1912. It was used as a shipping port, Coffs Harbour, in the early days to carry cedar logs So cedar, of course, was very good quality wood, and these were hauled by train across Coffs Creek and then loaded up and shipped out. So very, very important early timber trade for Coffs Harbour. And there's a view there of some cedar logs being hauled by a locomotive across Coffs Creek around about 1910. And the company that did that was the British Australian Timber Company. So that's a view in Wikipedia Commons. This one here again is, you can see the Fitzroy Hotel in the background, just over there. Another view of the post office has been extended and fences added there. There's some writing here. Unfortunately, I just can't read what it says, but it appears also that there's a bullock dray in the foreground there. So they were certainly bullock, hauling various items by bullock was used in the area quite a lot, as it was in many other rural parts of New South Wales. There's an early view of the Coffs Harbour Show. I don't know when it began, but some of you may. This is 1914, and certainly they had livestock displays. You can see that going on. There's the Australian flag right in the centre there, and quite a big crowd and lots of early automobiles there. I know what T-model Fords look like from the front, but I can't recognise them from the back. So some of these might be T-model Fords. That one there does look a bit like a Model T Roadster, 1914 Model T Roadster, but I'm certainly not 100% sure on that one. Another view down High Street in Coffs Harbour. This is around about 1915, and you can see motor vehicles certainly starting to appear on the streets. It was a wide street, you can see it there. The striped poles there indicates possibly a barber shop just on the left there, and we do have certainly telephone lines there. There might even be some electric wires tied up in that as well, I just don't know. But quite a handsome looking main street. It wasn't sealed, of course, in those days, but we had a mixture of horse-drawn traffic and motor vehicles starting to appear. That's a view of the Pier Hotel, and about 1915, possibly, it looks like some sort of a celebration was going on. We can see the British flag there. It didn't really say what was on the photograph there, but I'm taking a guess it could have been the Empire Day, which was the 24th of May, Queen Victoria's birthday. So they were big celebration days, Empire Days, in that era. This is during the First World War. So I'm just taking a bit of a punt here and saying this could have been Empire Day in 1915. And this may have been part of the same celebration, soldiers from the Australian Light Horse Brigade, 1915, and once again it looks as though some sort of celebration. It may well have been Empire Day. That's Best's Guest House. We saw that in a previous photo there, and just across the road we can see the fence there as part of the post office. So they might have been part of the Empire Day celebration. There's a view of the famous Coffs Harbour jetty. As was mentioned, I'm a meteorologist, so I was interested in all these photographs I found of rough weather, and certainly some sort of a storm going on there. On the original photograph, it's got storm at Coffs. So that was 1917. Again, from most of these photos are from Coffs collections, which are a very, very good collection of old photographs of the area there, not just Coffs Harbour, but some very good photos from right around the area can be found there, many of these online. A photograph of Edinburgh Street, Coffs Harbour, about 1920, and this shows a couple of interesting things. Harry Robinson, a blacksmith, and next door to him was a motor garage, and Robinson was engineers and blacksmiths. So they started to combine the old blacksmith's trade with motor cars, with motor repairers, motor garages. So that sort of combination was again quite common, not just in rural parts, but in Sydney as well. The blacksmiths became motor mechanics in many cases. So that seemed to be the case here in Edinburgh Street. This is around about 1920. Another view of the Fitzroy Hotel, again in 1920, a bit closer up, and you can see what a grand structure it was. And it also looks like a very nice looking house next door to it there. So that's a good view of the hotel. That was around about 1920. And another view of the hotel. Apparently there was a fire. It was largely rebuilt after a big fire in 1941, and some of you might know the history of that. So it was rebuilt then. A view from Coffs Harbour, from a hill, obviously behind the town. That was 1922, and you can see the areas now that, of course, have all been developed there, which were blank. And I can't recognise. I think the Pier Hotel's there somewhere, and perhaps the Fitzroy Hotel, but I can't recognise them from that. But once again, this is something that you people will be more familiar with than me. Drainage, of course, was always an issue, and Coffs can get heavy rain, and there's a subtropical climate, and flooding in the streets was not uncommon. This is 1922. This is looking west from Mooney Street. They're talking about after a shower, but I think it was probably a bit more than that. It looks like there's been a fair bit of heavy rain there, and there's looks like a lady standing in the water over on this side here, but there's a bakery, and there's a butcher's there. I don't recognise this, but some of you will recognise some of these buildings from long ago. 1922, of course, that's 99 years ago, so things have changed a bit. There's a view down High Street in 1930. Looks like a dry day, and the street is really starting to take form. You can see it's neat. The curbing and guttering is neat, and you could also park in the middle of the road. So that was I don't know how long that had been going at that stage. And once again, you've got the striped pole there. That could have been the same barbers we saw before from the other, looking from the other direction. This one, Coffs Harbour Railway Station. Now, the bags here, I can just see on this bag here, PMG, New South Wales. So these could be mail bags, but I'm pretty surprised about the amount of mail if that was the case. So that was Coffs Harbour Station about 1930. So some of you might have some comments on that. I don't know whether it's all mail bags or just partly that, but obviously they were either taken off a train or they're getting ready to be loaded onto a train that's coming in. A very famous airport, right from the early days, Coffs Harbour Airport, because it was a refuelling stop. Aircraft flying from Sydney to Brisbane would refuel at Coffs Harbour, and back the other way from Brisbane to Sydney they'd refuel. And that was a very famous aircraft. That was the Southern Cloud, Victor Hotel, Uniform Michael Foxtrot, UMF, and that became very infamous because it disappeared without a trace. In March 1931, it took off from Sydney heading to Melbourne, and it disappeared without trace, and it was discovered 27 years ago in the Kosciuszko National Park, where it had crashed in the middle of a very bad storm. So it used to refuel at Coffs Harbour. You can see a bloke up on the wing there refueling, and these were 3-engined aircraft. They were tri-motors. They were Fokker 10s, and they were quite a big aircraft for the day, but they were fairly much underpowered, and during bad weather they couldn't climb very high. So during Sydney to Melbourne, during that storm, he got caught, and they lost all on board. It became our first major airline accident. So they were a regular refueler at Coffs Harbour Airport. You can see the nature of the airport too. The actual rough aerodrome that the rural airports were quite common. Now, I don't know anything about this one. It looks like there's a lot of Boy Scouts and Cubs on parade there. And this on the photograph was labelled as the Coffs Harbour Band. So I don't know what the celebration was there, but they seem to be mostly Scouts and Cubs in the background. There's the new Coffs Harbour Post Office. So by this stage in 1938, it's a handsome brick building. And one thing you used to see a lot, even when I was a young fella, they had these scales, and you could put a penny in or however much that they charged, and it would weigh you. So they were fairly common around public buildings in the area. Another view of Coffs Harbour, and this time you can see the Pier Hotel mid-picture. This was apparently 1940, a general view of Coffs Harbour Jetty, New South Wales. Over to Sawtell, I'm a little more familiar with Sawtell, and that's the famous Hilltop store that's still there today. And this is a 1940 view. Today, the view looks quite similar. The structure of the building is quite similar, but these trees have grown up enormously. So I'm sure many of you have been to that Hilltop store. It's changed sort of functions many times, but back in this day, it looks like there was like a general store, Peter's Ice Cream there, so it looks like you can go in and buy refreshments and perhaps some groceries as well. You can see the grocery sign up there, and Bushell's Tea. Another view of the Fitzroy Hotel. This is around about 1950. Now, apparently, as I mentioned before, it burnt down in 1941, so this was a rebuild, but I understand it was on the same location. So you can see some interesting old cars there. That's about 1950. This is First Avenue, Sawtell, in around about 1950, and on the right's the Imperial Hotel, which is still there, but the architecture is different. And all down the middle of the road now, of course, we've got very large, I think they're fig trees that have grown up since, but they were just in the early stages of growth there. So that's around about 1950, the main First Avenue in Sawtell. There's another view of the Pier Hotel in 1950, offering accommodation, so friendly service, so you can obviously get accommodation there if you're a tourist. And there's an FX Holden there, so and some of you may recognise the other ones there. That might be a custom line there, but that's very much a 1950s type view. The FJ Holden had horizontal grill on the radiator, and the FX had the vertical grill that we can see there. Now that's the Sawtell Reserve Hall. I don't know anything about it, so yeah, please let me know if you do. It looks like there was some sort of a social centre there, and that was dancing in the 1950s from Coffs collection. So it looks like a pretty happy occasion. It could have been New Year's Eve or something like that, but a big crowd there, and they all look pretty happy. And there's a view of the Coffs Harbour show, Sideshow Alley, again, an image from Coffs local history. And it looks as though there was, I don't know whether that was a motorbike track or a trotting track or something around the edge there, but some of you will know that. But very, very busy. Looks like many people attended it back in those days. We saw the first one from 1914. This one's 1958. And just to finish up with, some weather records from Coffs Harbour that might interest you. This was from the Coffs Harbour Meteorological Office that was at the airport between 1943 and 2015. The highest temperature recorded at that time was 43.3, recorded twice, 17th of January 2002 and the 19th of November 1968. The lowest temperature was -3.2, and that was recorded on the 17th of July 1966, as we expect that would be during the winter months. The wettest year was 1963, when we had over 2,000, nearly 3,000 millimetres of rain, and the driest year was 1968. And the strongest wind gust was 124 kilometres an hour on the 9th of July 1985. And this image here shows you 1963. I chose 1963 because it was the wettest year. And you can see the highest on record is that dark blue cover. And that was, you can see Coffs Harbour, that was that record rain in 1963. So there was very heavy rain, a lot of flooding right along the New South Wales coast during that year. And over in Western Australia, it was an abnormally wet year as well. So that's where I'll just get out of that and get out of my sharing, and I'd be very happy to take any questions or more particularly comments from people that know more about it than I do. So thanks very much. Any questions or comments, please?
Bev Storley.
Hi, that was very interesting. My father was stationed here during the Second World War, and he was part of the Light Horse.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Yes, I've got photos of him and on the beach with the Light Horse, and he absolutely loved it. And of course, in those days, nobody had any idea that the bunker existed during the Second World War. So, and he was here to protect the airstrip and the railway line, because it was a target for the Japanese. Yeah. So he loved it.
Yes, thank you. I think the Light Horse were they were later involved in the charge at Beersheba, which I think was 1917. So there might have even been some people in Coffs Harbour that that were involved in that. Of course, being rural men and many farmers, there were some very, very fine horsemen from the Light Horse, and many of those came from rural areas.
Yes, I was going to comment on the view of the main street. It was a dirt road and there was not one pothole. It was in incredibly good condition, seeing we get so much rain. And so was now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how they maintained the roads, but you did see some very good quality unsealed roads. So I don't know whether they had some way of degrading them or what they did, but yes, it did look in good condition. And we're from, I live in Terrigal now, and I don't know whether you heard all the problems with the Central Coast Council, but a lot of the roads have literally gone to pot in our area after the heavy rain, and very, very big potholes. So it's become quite a local issue.
Dick, I have a question as well. You're showing pictures of telegraph poles around the 1914, 1915 period. I'm just curious because I did a lot of research on our World War I submarine AE2, which was 1915, of course. It involved in the Anzac episode. And I thought back then there was just early telegraphy, just Morse code. I'm not quite sure when voice communication, telephone came into existence, but can you clarify that at all? Do you think it might have just been Morse code wires up there?
Yeah, I think the early connections were telegraph, by telegraph, which was, I think, essentially Morse code. And then it became voice, but I don't know when that was the case. I know in Sydney they did have telegraph connections right back in the 1880s, and I think you could go to the post office and send a Morse code telegram, and then of course telephones came in, but I don't know when that happened. It was sometimes later. In Sydney, it was probably the capital cities. It was probably earlier than the rural centres, but I know in where I live in Terrigal there, it was around about the same date. It was around about the First World War when they had voice telephones. So, but I can't give you a real date when that was happening in Coffs Harbour.
I'm thinking back to Downton Abbey. And I'm pretty sure because they're a wealthy family, and I think they got telephone connected to the house around about World War I.
I was going to ask a question to anybody. The Fitzroy Hotel, I think is that now known as the Coast Hotel? Is that the rename of it?
Yeah.
It is, they're saying. Yes. Okay. Any other questions for Dick? Oh, Peter.
Good morning there, Dick. The photo of the railway station with all the mail bags on it.
Yes.
I can only tell you what the railway, we clarify that as, or what we've been told, is that was the first train that had just come in from Raleigh to Coffs Harbour in 1915, when that section of the line was opened. And all those mail bags come from Raleigh, and because they've been brought up by ship, which was the practice prior to the railway coming through. And that was a backlog of all the mail that come by ship that was brought up on the first train from Raleigh to Coffs. That's what we were told, but of course I can't prove that.
Well, that was logical because I was amazed at the amount of mail there. So as you say, it's a backlog, so that would make sense, I guess.
But whether the year 1915 is correct or not, with that train or in that mail, I don't know. But that's what we've got down in our records anyway.
Yep. Okay.
Any other questions from anyone? Looks like that's it, Peter. Dick, so that was Peter who asked us question.
Yeah,
Dick, yeah, thank you so much. We're all very privileged to have had your talk this morning, and thank you for getting up so early and addressing us. It's been lovely to meet you and to hear from you. If you ever come into Coffs Harbour, why don't you join us for breakfast one time? Rotary Club at Coffs Harbour Daybreak. It'd be nice to meet you in face. But thank you very much for your talk. It's fascinating. I was fascinated to look at all those pictures and think, in some ways it wasn't that long ago, and look how far we've progressed technologically and numbers of people and style of cars and all those things. So it's quite a interesting perspective reset. Thank you very much, and I'll ask our club members to thank you in the usual manner.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks, Dick.